Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Nimesha and I'm here with Auntie Shehani to bring you some conversations around emotional and mental well-being. This is an initiative brought to you by the Sri Lankan newspaper, the first Sri Lankan newspaper in New Zealand that's distributed all over the country. We aim to bring you a few episodes in this series over the next few months. So today's episode is especially looking at the lived experiences of migrants and the second generation, and we hope to have these conversations taking into consideration as many lived experiences as we possibly can, so that the viewers and the people joining us are given a real opportunity to reflect as on their own lived experiences. So, like I said, my name's Nimesha, and my background is in psychology and human nutrition. And at the moment, I practice as a mental health educator and a wellbeing strategist. I do educational engagements, wellbeing seminars, workshops, and consulting for individual and community-based mental health projects. So that's me. Auntie Shehani, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Shehani De Silva, and I have a background in psychology myself. I am at present working with a transcultural mental health service here in Melbourne, Australia. And I have worked in the field of mental health in a diverse settings, a range of diverse settings for over maybe 25 years or 30 years. And this in Sri Lanka, I've worked in mental health in Sri Lanka, in also a short stint in New Zealand when I was living there, and now here in Melbourne. Apart from that, I think when I think of myself, I think of my two daughters. So I'm a mother of two daughters, one of whom lives with disability. That's me.
Yeah, so that's so great. So me and Auntie Shehani are really excited to bring you this first episode. So before we get going, I will provide a trigger warning. So the aim of these episodes is to provide a space to have honest conversations and reflect on different lived experiences. And so because of that, some of the content may trigger an adverse emotional reaction. So if the episode does emotionally upset you, please know that in the description there will be some links to mental health helplines. They're fantastic. You don't have to identify yourself. You can just give them a call if you want, if you're at all distressed, and you can always come back to this clip and view it when you feel ready to. So, yeah.
So Nimesha and I have been talking about these episodes for a while now. And as Nimesha said, in today's episode, we thought we would begin the series by having a conversation about how migrant communities such as us negotiate belonging and how we integrate into this new community. When I say new community, I mean the host country, the country we have migrated to, and in some ways how this experience may look different for the first generation migrant. So I am a first generation migrant to that of the second generation migrant, such as Nimesha or even my daughter who's born here. So for the purposes of this program, when we talk about first generation migrants, we talk about those who have actually left their country of origin and have come to either Australia or New Zealand, settled down. And the second generation migrants are those people who are born to this in this host country. I think a lot has been researched and written about this topic, Nimesha. I think we've talked about it, we've read about it.
Yeah.
I think and a lot has been written since worldwide migration began.
Mm-hmm,
but I think we are still working out how this should look like, how this affects each of us very differently. Also, how we each negotiate this journey in different ways, isn't it? So today we are going to talk about how this journey may have affected the first generation migrants such as myself, and then how the impact of that on people such as you. So anyway, enough of that. And I thought we'll start, Nimesha, by just asking you how you are going and how things are going for you these days, and just let us know what you're doing these days.
Yeah, sure. Well, at the moment I'm actually doing a range of different things, so it gets a bit confusing, but I predominantly work with and for South Asian youth and families. So I spend my time, constructing mental health interventions and consulting with people. Usually it's children's, teens, adults and their families, because you can't really separate us out the same way you can with Western families. It just doesn't have the same effect. That's what I find in my practice anyway. So yeah, I'm currently doing that, and also I'm doing another course online, which is in rapid transformational therapy, which is a form of psychological therapy. And so yeah, these days while studying, and I'm also creating educational mental health content online, so for various online platforms. And so those things keep me busy. I'm also in the middle of setting up a support group called the Eclectic Era for South Asian young people, just like myself, who identify as children of migrants, and who have the same shared experience of, the unique challenges that we face as children of migrants, managing the expectations of the two separate cultures. So yeah, I'm kept busy.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And it sounds exciting for me because I work in this area, and I'm just about starting to see young people, young second generation people coming into the sector, mental health sector, and actually changing the conversation about the fact that they bring in unique experiences. So it's great to hear that people such as you are getting there and changing this landscape. So well done. I had a question. You were talking about putting up, did you say some kind of educational material? Is this for the larger community or just for the your community or the South Asian community?
Well, it'll be a lot of it will pertain to the South Asian community, and I will be discussing a lot of the same, like topics just like the ones we're discussing at the moment. But I also create content, so that'll be for a YouTube channel that I'm hoping to get up and running hopefully in the next month or so. So we'll see about that. But apart from that, also I create like workshops and seminars and things like that for depending on who would like to hear from me. So all those it just depends. The educational content that I create just depends on the case by case, but primarily for YouTube, that's what I'll be focusing on in the next couple of weeks as well. So yeah.
Great. So I hope at the end of our conversation, you will put in the links to all these activities that you're doing, so that if anyone's interested, they could access those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So listen, let's start. I mean, one of the reasons that interested me in this conversation when I had these conversations with you previously, I remember whilst you were recalling some really good times growing up in New Zealand. I still remember those, the way you referred to them. What interested me was that you also touched on some of the difficulties you had. So I'm just wondering whether you'd like to share some of these experiences with us, because I feel these stories are quite common amongst the second generation communities. I'm calling them second generation communities, but I know in some ways these are talked of personally, but actually not referred to as often. So I was just wondering whether we could make this a platform to have that discussion, and through your story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I growing up a Sri Lankan Kiwi, there were some great things, like you said. I touched on those things because I was a Kandyan dancer, Sri Lankan dancing. I had my education, my educational background was really emphasized, and I did tuition, music, piano classes, and I grew up on Sri Lankan food. So like, I don't know if there's nothing to complain about there, which is good. But all of which I'm really grateful for now. But at the time when these things were occurring and the lifestyle that I was living, I probably wouldn't have said the same things, because at that time, I guess, they made me feel so different to the kids at school. So and the worst part was the thing that made it difficult was that I didn't always have the words to explain the things that we did to my white friends in a way that empowered me or made me feel good about the lifestyle that I lived. So I would be more likely to either be made fun of or misunderstood, and that took a big toll on my self-esteem. And I would say that I was quite an anxious kid growing up, because the process of learning what's safe in one culture and another, you make a lot of mistakes along the way, and then you feel like you're wrong all the time, and then the confusion breeds all the self-doubt, and then we've all had self-doubt, but there's a big difference in your central nervous system when your body has sort of sustained a higher base rate of anxiety since childhood, without it being known about or addressed. And it's a subject that, like you said, we don't really talk about. So, today I'm pleased to be able to touch on it.
So I'm just wondering. Clearly you felt there were many cultural differences, and I use the word culture very carefully here. It is in no way trying to put down the culture or talk about how bad a culture is, because no culture is bad, but clearly there were challenging cultural differences between having to navigate between home and the outside world. Do you think how did you negotiate, if you did have to, how did you negotiate that?
It's not necessarily that one culture is bad or the other is better. What, like you said, it's just that the difference is like so stark in a number of, like, I will give you a couple of examples. So with the differences in the classroom and home. So in the classroom, we're expected to, raise your hand. And sometimes they even say, okay, yell out your answers. Okay, what else? Okay, give your opinion. Yep. Okay, put your hand up. Okay, you're expected to like just express everything. And so, you try to do that at home and it just doesn't go down the same way, I notice. And so, the things that are encouraged in one environment are not as necessarily, it doesn't apply in another context. And so that makes it quite challenging to know what to do. And especially with that particular example, if you don't speak up in class, then you're probably going to get a bad report card, saying that she doesn't participate or he doesn't partake in the classroom discussions, and that can actually affect your academic success. And as you get older, your work life, you may not get a promotion because of the ways that the cultural differences in the way that we're brought up. And so that's probably one good example. And then just another really obvious example would be between what young people face is observing the differences between our lifestyle and what our white friends can do and can't do. So what I noticed in my, while I was growing up, was that the kids at school, they were allowed to be like out a lot more leisurely. So they could, the bell would go off at 3:30, and then, they would be, as my mother would call it, gallivanting on the streets, and then they would be doing their thing, and they'd be like, Nimesha, you should come, and then I'd be like, oh, but I gotta, and for me, luckily my mum, she finished work at 5:00, and so I had to catch the bus, and one too many times the bus was so late, and that stress. I mean, I got away with it, but like the stress of having to do all these calculations all the time, I mean, it does get to you. And we were just doing harmless things, going to the mall, buying a muffin, and just hanging out. And actually, when I couldn't hang out, or the days that for example, if there was more sleepovers or something that I couldn't go to as often, I found it kind of a bit of a struggle, because at school the next day, the way that relationships are built, they're built on memories and things. And so the memories that they would have, I wouldn't be able to participate in because I wasn't at the sleepover or the party or whatever it was. And so you do feel quite left out a little bit.
I mean, I'm thinking here whilst you're talking. I have a daughter who constantly challenges me about my thoughts or ideas around sleepovers. So I heard you talk about sleepovers. We haven't negotiated that still. So, yeah, no sleepovers, unfortunately. Till what age, I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah, I can see how difficult things are, and can be when you're going from one, in some ways, extreme to another.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so
Mm.
that's like from my side, but from the parents' side or the migrants themselves, like you guys came here, looking for a better life and, facing your own challenges. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced as, leaving all of your family and friends and coming here?
Yeah, yeah. I think in many ways, some of those challenges continue to date, as with anything in life.
Mm-hmm.
I still struggle with some things
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't yet come to understand and know. But in terms of the one of the biggest struggles for me, and I have to be honest here, is that whatever the struggles and experiences I faced are personal, and I know this may not be the same for every
Yeah.
migrant.
Yeah, likewise.
We bring in all different unique experiences, but one of the greatest difficulties for me was to make the decision to leave behind my parents,
Mm.
um, and leave behind family. So for me, leave behind 30 years of what I knew life as.
Mm.
So all my friends, my cousins, the way of life, I can't even describe what that is. The people you could relate to and knew while you were growing up. And one of the strange things is I even missed the way things were done in our workplaces. So I don't know whether people can identify with this, but in Sri Lanka, in some ways, we interacted in workplaces in very different ways to how it's done over here. Again, but I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it was very different. So after 25 or 30 odd years of knowing one way to change, and that's why I say I'm still doing that. So in some ways, I'm still doing that. The other thing that really struck me, and one thing that more than I ever anticipated, was I missed seeing people like myself, to a point where for those first few years I was drawn, not first few years, like first 10 years maybe, I was very much drawn towards the Sri Lankan community. Even sometimes when I may not have had much in common with some, I think that longing to speak the language, the longing to be with people who looked like me, was huge for me. And so, in some ways, it's strange. I have maintained some of those friendships after I've left New Zealand. I was in New Zealand. That was my first experience of being away from home. I've still kept those some of those relationships, but that was really very strong. That tendency to always want to meet up on a weekend, to a point where it got a bit exhausting. But I felt the need to always. I felt the need to always do that. So I think the other thing that comes to my mind is there is always this feeling that we have given up so much, we've lost so much, and in order to compensate for all those things that we gave up or that we lost, we sort of tend to, or I sort of tend to hold on to it even more securely, even when we came here.
Right.
So things that I would otherwise not have done back home in Sri Lanka. I can't think of the things right now tended to be more involved. Again, that feeling that, oh, I need to hold on to something something. And I think the other thing is that this is what makes us then look at our young people and go, so we go with this outlook that we've given up everything to give you something better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as a result, we expect our children to seamlessly navigate through this. So we wouldn't even think of issues that you've just mentioned. We would go, I would go, what are you talking about? We have done all these things. We've come all this way. We've left Archie and Sia and Lokwama and Lokunanda and all of them behind to come here only because we want to give you this supposedly better quality of life. And I think that's a big issue that adults like me grapple with. But I think also one of the biggest challenges that some of us face, to look at what's the best middle path in some ways, between us and our kids. I think those are some of the issues I still struggle with. Do I have real friends who are my friends? Are they the white friends that I've made along the way in my life here? Or are they some of the friends I left back home? Sometimes I don't feel belong to either sometimes. There is that. Again, these are my experiences, but I'm wondering whether it's fairly similar for a lot of migrants.
There are definitely some parallels between the things that you mentioned, the feeling of not belonging, or you've not being sure. Just now you said that, not sure who are my kind of real people, or there is a bit of confusion. Even the younger generation would be able to relate to those things. But
those things. And we would never think that us older ones or the first generation migrants would feel that. But I think we feel a sense of loss and disconnect.
It makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not so sure whether it's discussed as much again, but Nimesha, I feel a bit, not upset is the word. We've talked about this before, but I just wonder whether this is a good time to actually ask, so what is it that parents can do to help people who are growing up, the young people who are growing up, the second generation growing up, to ensure that life is less challenging? I'm just wondering whether you can think of a few things that us as older people can do.
Yeah, just before I answer that, I just want to say that, I think the parents did actually achieve what they wanted to achieve. I think, bringing us here, we definitely have a lot more opportunities than we might have had when we were back, if we'd stayed in Sri Lanka. And it's sort of just a trade-off, and it just comes with the territory, unfortunately, which, we weren't, I don't think anyone was prepared for, not the kids, not the parents, so it is like that. But for parents, I think just being open to the fact that I guess it would become kind of difficult to accept that things might not be as seamless for the kids when they get here. But like I said, in the beginning, our nervous systems have been through things as well, that we didn't anticipate, and we didn't really have the skills to cope with when we were growing up. So 5, 6, 7, 8, no one really knows what to do, and at that time no one's really picking up on anything at that time, and not even the kids would be able to tell you what was going on for them. So it does get quite tricky. But I think just be mindful, parents, that what you see on the outside probably is not, all that is going on, especially mentally for the young people and for the children, because, they may, like I said, not be able to fully verbalize what's going on for them, and because we've built this sort of fear of being wrong in one culture or the other, we're always more likely to feel like we're doing something inaccurate, or we're off track all the time. So because of that, if it's really important that parents sort of signal a safe space for children to come and talk about their feelings, because they need that reassurance more than I've heard with the families that I've worked with, you always hear the parents saying, they could have just come and talked to me, or she could have just said this. I've been there the whole time. I'm the mum, or I'm the dad, and it's a lot easier said than done, because if it's not spoken about in the house, children aren't, they need to be guided in some way. And so basically, when I say we need to provide some sort of a safe space for the children to speak about their feelings, I say that with caution, because most people would agree that, in my experience and with the patients and clients that I've worked with, they basically talk a lot about how emotions are not discussed, especially if they're South Asian or Asian, and they're not really spoken about in depth in the Sri Lankan culture. And so actually it's quite sad that many of us learn not to talk about our feelings with parents as deeply, and that does affect the emotional connection between the parents and the kids. And so I guess for parents, I would be mindful that what you see is there's probably more going on than the kids sometimes even make look seamless. They do manage to get the good grades, they do manage to do X, Y, and Z, but there's probably a lot more going on for them. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend doing some research, and especially researching our population, like the second generations, and what it's like for us, and listening and tuning into talks like this, doing the research, and especially with emotions, because emotional well-being is not touched on enough, and that's my observation. And so I would really highly recommend investing in a course, or you're doing an emotional intelligence or emotional well-being course, things like that, or even like conscious parenting courses. Those are both subjects that I feel very strongly about, just because of my observations, and I will be doing some seminars and workshops in the near future. But the truth is that when we don't nurture our emotions, you're left quite open to like a lot of psychological wounds, and that can affect our entire psyche and health. And with the parents who you empathize with them, because they never had that emotional catering either, where their parents necessarily went into detail with them about their feelings. But if you are familiar, I don't know, Auntie Shehani, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, so basically with each tier of the pyramid, the first tier is your psychological or physiological needs. So that's your food, water, and shelter. And once that's met, then you go up to your safety needs. And so that can be, financial security, or other forms of safety. And then you move on to love and a sense of belonging. And so with each layer and tier of this pyramid, there are different needs that are required to be met, more so than other times. So a lot of our migrant parents are trying to, nail getting the food, the water, the shelter, get them into schools and things like that. And they do that really well. But what that means is, because that layer is covered for the kids, we're so lucky that we have that done. We now have a new set of needs, because we've moved up to the second tier of the hierarchy. And so just learning about what emotional well-being would be, is a really good investment, I think, for parents. So, yeah.
And I mean, I'm a parent, I'm sitting here listening to this, and I don't think it's something we don't have. All of us have this. I think the thing is that we show it in different ways, and let's continue to talk about it a bit later at the stage in our conversation. But I just was wondering, this is a good point, I think, to bring in this whole discussion around identity. So I know we talked about it before, but I said we as first generation migrants sometimes struggle with, what is my role? Where do I belong? So in spite of having gone through all what you discussed, Nimesha, I'm just wondering, so how do you view, I mean, you're a young woman now. How do you view yourself now? Do you see yourself as a Kiwi or a Sri Lankan Kiwi, or are you a bit of both, depending on the
Yeah.
situation? So I know most people from diverse backgrounds grapple with this. And as I said, I grapple with it sometimes. I mean, I'm much older than you. But one thing, if I can give you an example, and that this happened to me when my younger daughter was in her primary school. She came one day to tell me about how a friend of hers they were doing some coloring activity, and a friend of hers wanted the skin colored pencil. So this has stayed with me till now, actually, and both of us talk about it a lot. And I think she was, I don't know whether she was being cheeky or she knew what was happening or not, but she happened to give the brown color, I mean, our skin colored pencil, and she was immediately told, no, that's brown. I want the skin colored pencil, which was clearly they were referring to a, I don't know, more pink or a white, I don't know, pink colored pencil. So I think I was wondering, and this question came up about, so what does this mean? Does this mean that that's what's visible outside? Does that mean that the fact that there are brown colored skin people is not visible? And does this have an impact on the identity of second generation migrants wanting to be another? And this is what I was wondering, what your thoughts were. I've heard of girls wanting to color their hair blonde, and that's fine. I color my hair. But what are your thoughts about it? And where do you think you fit in now in terms of your identity?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so when you get, I had a similar situation with a crayon and a pencil. They just asked for the skin color one, and then I somehow observed in that girl's drawing that it was pink, so I made that connection, and I was able to hand her the pink or the lighter shade. But yeah, absolutely, like, I definitely grew up wishing that I had that I didn't know the word at that time, but I wished I had yellow hair with blue eyes, and I wished I looked different for a lot of my upbringing, my childhood. Yeah, and I do identify as a Sri Lankan Kiwi now, and more proudly than ever before. So I used to really because the things because I was longing for connections with my friends and, wanting that sense of approval and a sense of belonging. I mean, I'm at school for 6 hours a day, and then, they're going to be in my group next in the next class, and I have to hang out with them. And, I really valued their acceptance of me. And because the Sri Lankan culture and the way that I lived at home did affect that, I grew like very I don't know, I didn't want to be Sri Lankan. This very sad like denial of who I was and embarrassment of who I was. And I just want to say to any young person who is listening and who is watching, you are the best of both worlds, and you have the good traits of both cultures, and you should carry that with pride, because you can't beat Sri Lankan food, one, and second of all, like we are the most adaptable species. They're the East and the West, we are the blend of the both, so the best. But yeah, I could definitely say that I did reject my culture, and I did deny it, and I did wish it would just disappear so that I could just be normal, or what I thought was normal. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of young people, as I said, grapple with this issue. And it's great to hear that you're in a place where you enjoy both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
As one should. Yeah. So I'm just wondering whether we could have a chat about mental health, actually. Do you have any questions around what us parents should do in terms of supporting young people, or
Yeah, from your perspective, Auntie Shehani, you are a mum and a migrant and, you're a person working in mental health. So what would you suggest to parents in relation to supporting young people?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the above that you mentioned. I agree with all of what you said. But there are three things that stick out for me. One is this discussion about creating a safe space and being supportive. And I think for me, what that means is being supportive but not reactive,
Mm.
as in not reacting in negative ways when things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because we, in some ways, we tend to forget that we all make mistakes in life, and this is no different with young people, more so in young people, because they're experimenting in terms of life. I mean, they're just growing up. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean they should get away with everything that they do. But I think to be mindful that reacting to something is not going to get us anywhere. Second one is, I think, is what I've seen a lot with my daughter also is encouraging the truth from the beginning, but not punish if the truth is something that we don't want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think so. It's a bit of a you're taking the risk to go. No matter what, you tell me the truth. No matter what, you need to. But that means you will not have to face adverse consequences.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult to make that. I think that's a difficult path to go, and I'm wondering whether parents or adults listening to this would go, "Oh, this is rubbish." But I think that's one really good way of connecting with the young people and listen, having trust both ways.
Mm.
And also, my final thing is, inviting people to have conversations. You talked about it, and you touched on that. But I also want you all to understand, and the young people listening to understand that these are all struggles parents go through. But
Mm.
parents or adults, we feel in some ways we have to be aware that we are the adults in the relationship. Yeah, and in some ways this means that we have the responsibility to hold the issue for both our daughter or son and ourselves. We can't look as if we are losing control. We have to hold it for them and be supportive, but also deal with the anxiety me as a mother or father is going through, and that takes skill, and that's not easy. And actually this means also taking care of our own mental health. So we don't talk much about the adults. It's almost always about the young people and
Yeah.
their mental health. But I'm not so sure whether we are, as adults, mindful of the stress levels that we go through, of dealing with and negotiating so many differences
Yeah.
in our lives. Those are the three I think that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's definitely not easy, but you've stated some good ways that can lead to a more connected relationship with the kids. And like you said, with mental health, I've noticed that most South Asian people from South Asian backgrounds are quite reluctant to talk about mental health. Is that, from your perspective, why do you think that might be?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked, and I work in transcultural mental health here, which means looking at mental health from the perspective of culturally diverse communities. That's what we do here, and I'm almost always asked by mental health service providers,
Mm.
"Is this a cultural thing?" So I want to be clear that there is stigma and shame when it comes to mental ill health in our
Right.
communities. There is we don't differentiate between mental health and mental ill health, so mental illness. But I think this stigma and shame towards mental illness is not only common in these so-called South Asian communities, but honestly very prevalent in many Western countries. Even here, like in Australia, we only have to look at the policies that were around about 10 years ago with regards to mental illness. So that we have to be clear. The way we look at things may be different, but mental stigma or shame towards it is there everywhere. I also don't think, I'm not so sure if it's a cultural thing, but what I think it's more that there is not much of an understanding of what mental health and what mental illness is, as we have learned from a Western perspective. So the understandings are very different. So when you keep talking about Maslow's hierarchy of theory or anxiety, or, we may name them and see them differently. That doesn't mean one is wrong and one is right.
Yeah.
What it means is that we come from different perspectives. I think it is a very well researched fact that migrants face mental health difficulties for a number of reasons. Yeah, in relation to integrating to a new way of life, it is stressful. We don't want to accept it, because here we are who have left a place to come to a better place. We cannot say that the better place is causing us distress, so we don't talk about it. But the tendency is not to access the Western support that is out there. We live in a Western country. There is no other support available. However, I think we have to understand that let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We all bring in different explanations about why we are ill, or why we are not ill, or why we are dealing with issues. So for example, as a Buddhist, I know we talk about karma, past karma, as explanations of why things happen to our lives in certain ways. I'm sure people from other religions do the same thing. But the idea is not to, as I said, throw away that and just take on something that is very foreign or Western. Again, there is research to say people with mental health issues, recovery is faster if they access both. And when I say both, I mean, if I was feeling in low mood, my first port of call is calling my mother. That would be my first port of call. Pick up the phone and call my mother or my sister to say I'm feeling low. My next port of call will be do a Bodhi Puja or go to the temple. That it gives me a sense of it makes me feel calm. But my next port of call will be to actually access the GP. So research shows that people with mental health issues who access both have better chance of recovery as opposed to just one or the other. So this is why I'm saying we can have discussions around, is this cultural? Is this not right? Is this stigma bad? Yes to everything, but at the same time, that doesn't mean everything is bad. Yes, we come with several different understandings of why we are here or why we have mental health issues, but that doesn't mean that we just only stick to one thing. The idea is to encourage people to partake in both. I think the young, and I'm talking to you, maybe young people should understand that. Again, if we come to a middle path of understanding, I think is the best way to go. But I do agree that maybe living in a Western society, we should make the time or take the time to know how things are done here, but not to say that what we have come with is not good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you've given a really good explanation of how, like you said, just integrating the more, in my eyes, the more the merrier, the more ways of seeking support and strength. That's better for all. I have a couple of people that I've come across where they have really, it's quite sad to me because they've their family, this is an Indian family I'm talking about, but they, the child got sick mentally, and then they did pujas and things, but they were not open, although the child was wanting to seek further support.
Yeah.
The parents were not willing to do that, and then that makes the child she just really felt resentful of religion and all these other things that could have been a possible support network. But it's quite interesting. And like you said, the research does show that the in more integrated approach is better for everyone.
I think so. I think it's important, because we do tend to rubbish some of what we have brought from, or what we have learned throughout our years. And it's not about that. It's about looking at what works well from both worlds.
That's good. I'm just looking at the time and just thinking if we better wrap it up. But one thing I'd like to say, just do not be afraid to open up about, a mental health condition that your kids are going through, just like any other physical or medical condition. Do your research on how best to care and support them, and because we can all kind of thrive in any environment which gives us support, and if we learn about it and talk about it, it makes us easier to receive the right care a lot faster. So anything else you'd like to add, Auntie Shehani, before
I think I agree with what you do. We each of us have different impacts. As parents, as first generation migrants, the impact of all these is different to how it affects people, the second generation. I think that's something that we have to be really aware of, and also aware of the fact that we all have different ways of dealing. Nobody has a bad intention. It's just about trying to look at what's best for both of us, or both generations, and working on that. Again, as I said, migration, things have been written about migration for centuries, and I think it's about us still continuing to working on that. And I think we all do our best, but we can still continue to do better.
Sounds good. So before we sign off, one other thing I just do want to highlight is, this is what the research also says, that because I noticed that there's a sense of sort of shame if a child becomes mentally ill over any other any other physical condition. And I just want to highlight that for parents and anyone else who is possibly feeling like, oh, what's wrong with me, that, going through navigating two separate cultures, children of migrants are more prone to mental health conditions because we struggle with navigating those two separate cultures. And like I said, our nervous systems have been wired completely differently to people who have identified with the majority culture during their childhood and developmental years, when their bodies and brains were being developed. So, with that being said, please let us know if there's anything else that you would like to, any other topics that you'd like us to touch on, or if we've touched on something here that you want us to go deeper into in the next episode. You can contact me or Auntie Shehani, and I think we're ready to wrap up.
This has been great, Nimesha, if I can say so myself. I really, and thank you for joining me to have this discussion. I enjoyed listening. I always enjoy listening to young people, but honestly, listening to your perspectives of things. We both would like to thank the Sri Lankan newspaper for, in fact, inviting us to bring these conversations to people. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Nimesha, do you want to end with some of the links that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Shehani Auntie. You've been so open, and it's very nice to have someone, give us a voice and to hear your perspective in such a back and forth open way. It's been really nice. So the mental health helpline numbers that we discussed, they will be freely available again in the description below. There will be a link and possibly some of the numbers also just there and available. If anyone did want to contact me, my website will be launching soon. It's www.nimfluenza.com, and then my email is nimfluenza@gmail.com, but all of the links will be posted in the description below. And so, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.